can you write a percent greater than 100 as a fraction and as a decimal? Think about this question during the lesson. Jan and Kim built model cars for a science project. Kim's car traveled 140% as far as Jan's car. How can you write 140% as a fraction and as a decimal? Percents greater than 100 can be written as fractions and decimals greater than 1. The distance Jan's car traveled represents the whole, or 100%. What is represented as 140% in the problem? How do you know that Kim's car traveled farther than Jan's car? The distance Kim's car traveled is represented as 140% in the problem. Kim's car traveled farther than Jan's car because 140% is greater than 100%. Write 140% as a fraction compared to 100. What is the numerator?
Select your answer. %140 equals 140 hundredths. Use division to write an equivalent fraction. 140% can be written as 140 hundredths or 7/5. Why will the fraction form of a percent greater than 100 always have a numerator greater than the denominator? %100 is equivalent to 100 parts out of 100, or 100 hundredths. A percent greater than 100 will have a numerator greater than 100, yet the denominator will still be 100. You can use reasoning to write 140% as a decimal. You can also use division to write 140% as a decimal. Insert a decimal point and annex a 0 to divide. %140 can be written as 1 4/10. A decimal value greater than 1 will always be a percent greater than 100%. Why is a decimal value greater than 1 always a percent greater than 100%? A decimal value greater than 1 has more than 100 hundredths, so the equivalent percent will be greater than 100%. Now you know how to write a percent greater than 100 as a fraction and as a decimal. The area of a new movie theater is 225% of the area of the old theater. What is 225% as a fraction and as a decimal?
As a fraction, we would have to put the 225% over 100. And then it says as a fraction and as a decimal. As a decimal, you take your invisible decimal at the end here, and if you move it over 2 spaces, that will give you 2 25 hundredths as a decimal. That's the simplest way to go about doing that. Of course, you may divide, just so I can show you that. You may divide. 100 goes into 225 twice. That's 200. That's going to leave with 25. We're going to have to add a decimal here and annex 0. Drop down to 0. Now we got 250. 100 going to 250, another 2 times, and you keep going. Now you got 50, add another 0. Now we have 500. 100 goes into 505 times, and that is it. So these are just two ways of finding a decimal to a fraction. I'm sorry, to a percentage. And also with your fraction 225 over 100, you may certainly simplify that. But if it does not ask you to, you can leave it as the number over 100.
Write 1/2% as a fraction and as a decimal.
A percent less than 1 is less than 1 over 100 of the whole. We're going to click each part of the decimal grid to show what it represents. So we have this little piece shaded in. That's going to represent, 2/10 of a square, which is 0.2%. Then we have this purple. You have one full square and a portion of the other. That would represent one whole, which is where the 1 came from, and it's about 3/4 of the next one, so it'll be 1 3/4%. Then we have the blue here. You have 2 fully shaded and about a little more than half of the third one. So you have your 2 wholes in front of the decimal and 6/10 here percent. And last we have the yellow or orange, and that is about half, and so that's 0.5%. So here they wrote it all out for us. 0.5%, they took the 1/2 and put that over 100. So that's 1/2 divided by 100. And then we have a fraction, so you do keep, change, flip, right? Or keep, change, reciprocal. So they have the 1/2 times the 100 here. And then you multiply straight across. So now you have 1 over 200. And so 1 over 200 is the fraction form of 1/2%. And then you have to write it as a decimal. They show here 0.5% as a decimal is 0.5 or 5/10. Like 50 cents is half a dollar. And so you have the 0 and 5/10 over 100. And then here you have, because you need to make the decimal a whole number, you move that decimal over 2 places. That will give you, move it to the left. 2 places. That will give you 2 zeros behind the 5. And that is 5/1000ths. 5/1000ths, and then that will be the decimal version of 1/2%.
Write the percent of the solution that is water as a fraction and as a decimal.
Okay, so we have the 9/10% of this solution is water, and we have the 9/10% is less than 1. So if you look at that square, it's almost a whole square, but not quite. So it asks us to write it as a fraction and a decimal. So we have the 9/10 here that we need to divide by 100, because if you write it as a fraction, it'd be 9/10 over 100, but then you have to divide that to get that decimal out. So once you divide it, you will get 9/1000ths, and then you have 9% can be written as 9 over 1,000, and then as a decimal, once again, you're dividing it, and then you take the 0.9, and as I told you in the last example, if you move it to the left, you will get it to be a decimal, and you move it 2 places to the left. That gives you 2 zeros in front of the 9, and then that's your decimal. So let's take a look at doing this for these. So it says to write each as a fraction and a decimal. So we have 2/5%. So 2/5% will be 2/5 over 100. And then you have to divide 2/5 into 100. We have a fraction, so we have to keep change reciprocals. So we keep 2/5. We change division to multiplication, and the 100 will now be 1 over 100 because as a whole number we put it over 1, but now we have to do the reciprocal. That's why it's 1 over 100. And then you simply would multiply straight across. And then I'm just going to do this real quick. I'm going to simplify it first. 2 and 100 have 2 in common as a factor. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 100 divided by 2 is 50. So once I multiply straight across, I have 1 over 5 times 50 is 250. So then 2/5% as a fraction is 1 over 250. And then as a decimal, we're going to do some long division. So we're going to have 5 divide the denominator into the numerator. We have to add a decimal and a 0. 5 goes into 20 4 times. And so our you have 4/10 over 100. As I mentioned before, if you have a decimal as your percentage, you can move the decimal over 2 spaces. And now your decimal percent as a decimal will be that number. So we have 4,000. So you can write that as a fraction just because there, that'll be 4 thousandths. Now let's look at B, which is a decimal percent. So now we're starting with a decimal percentage. So we have 0 and 3%. That's going to be over 100. And because we're starting with a decimal as the percentage, we're going to move the decimal to the left. This is just the easiest way to do this. To the left 2 spaces, so that means our decimal for that percentage would be 0. Decimal 003, so that's 3 thousandths, and as a fraction, that would be 3 over 1,000 because that 3 is in that thousandths place.